My guest today is Taran Matharu, New York Times best-selling author with over 3 million copies of his books sold. Taran is also the co-founder of a small publishing house, Portal Books. Today, we talk about how Taran got his start on Wattpad during NaNoWriMo and then landed multiple book deals with traditional publishers, why he decided to start his own publishing house, what he's learned about the book industry since becoming a publisher, how he balances his work as a writer and as a publisher, and so much more. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Taryn, welcome to Creative Inspired Happy.
Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here today. I loved meeting you in Denmark at the Danish Fantasy Festival. And we have so much to talk about because not only are you an author, but you are also a publisher as well. You're co-founder of a small press. So I would love to first start, though, with kind of your origin story. How did you get started in writing? Because it's an interesting path.
Yeah. Uh, how did I get started in writing? Well, I guess, I've always been a writer since I was a younger teenager. My mum says I started when I was 9. I remember it as 11. She probably has a better memory than me, but I always say 11 to be safe because I don't know. But, I was always writing. I was a huge reader as well. I was very shy as a kid, and I didn't like sports very much or watching sports really because it would get, very loud for me. So I always had a book to distract myself. So, my whole family would go and watch like what I considered a very boring golf game on television. And I would be reading in the corner and they would be enjoying their golf. Yeah, sorry, I've rearranged the screen slightly there. Let me pull that up. I was just trying to fix this line that seems to be going across my face. I don't know if it's visible on yours.
It
Sorry
is.
about
It's
that.
okay.
Yeah.
It's like a narrow spotlight.
Yeah, I don't really know what's happening. It's never happened before. But anyway, sorry about that. So yeah, I was always a writer really, and I went to went to study business at university because my family business is in the hotel industry. We sort of renovate buildings, convert them to hotels, and then manage those hotels. So I thought that was what my destiny was, to go into a family business, and that is actually something I do as well now. As a sort of second job. But yeah, generally that's what I thought I would do. And then, I remember there was this presentation from Penguin, and they were like, "We want business people to come to this presentation at Bath." And I remember I was running late for something. I saw this email, and I was like, "Oh, should I go to this thing or not?" It was kind of last minute. I was like, "Yeah, I'll go." And I went there, and it was a guy called Tom Chicken, who was the sales director at Penguin, and he was basically telling me something that I've basically experienced since I've entered the industry, which is that it's a very homogenous industry with very similar demographics of people working in it. And they were saying that, they needed more business students because the world of publishing is becoming more business focused. It's the rise of Amazon, the rise of Audible. These are, you need to be sort of a bit more business minded when you're dealing with these sort of big conglomerates. So that's sort of what his message was. And there were 5,000 applicants, I think, for 4 roles, and I managed to snag one somehow. And I worked at Penguin as an intern. Actually, I arrived on the day that Penguin and Random House merged.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it was quite an interesting day. There was a lot of speeches on tables, and people worried and people happy. It's sort of weird environment to come into. But it didn't seem, very quickly it would return to business as usual. And yeah, I made some presentations to some of the sort of top management at Penguin Random House, which was pretty cool. And then, the whole time I was pestering my boss, and stop me if I'm rambling too long.
No, please. This
But
is very fascinating.
I remember pestering my boss. I was like, let me show some of my writing to an editor here. And he was like, no, 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 don't disturb them. And it's typical. It's typical actually. Most people who enter publishing, they've probably got some novel in a drawer somewhere, or they've started a few things and they've wanted to show some of their work to an editor. I think it's a story as old as time in the publishing industry. So I don't begrudge my boss from saying like, don't bother the editors. I was a little lowly intern. Totally get it, right? But what he did say, and he actually mentioned Wattpad, which is what I'm going to talk about, Wattpad in his presentation at Bath. So at the time, Wattpad was like the new thing, like, ooh, Wattpad, it's got 40 million users, it's serialized fiction, it's mostly teenagers using it. and publishers, of course, like, how do we profit from this? How do we, how do we work with Wattpad to benefit our business? So, he was very interested in Wattpad. So he said, yeah, put some of your work on Wattpad. I'm sure it will go viral on there and you'll get, a big book deal and go on to become a full-time writer, sort of thing. And I think at the time something like 10 people had managed to get book deals from Wattpad, and it had like maybe 30 million users or something at the time. So the chances were pretty slim. It was kind of like winning the lottery. But a lot of that writing is done by teenagers, and not to denigrate the writing of teenagers, but experience does matter, and it's hard to get experience when you're 13 years old. So I wouldn't say the odds are quite as bad as people might think, but I approached it with a sort of business mind. I was like, I want to be successful on Wattpad. So I went on Wattpad and I sort of researched what was working, asked people to vote at the end of chapters, just like on YouTube, people ask people to like at the end of watching it. So yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button right now for Evelyn, or if you're on the podcast, because it does help. It really does help with the algorithm. And that sort of thing, and how often you should upload and how long should your chapters be. I really approached it, from a sort of startup mindset. And the first, I decided to take part in National Novel Writing Month, which is where you try and write 50,000 words in 1 month. And I succeeded. And every day I would upload a chapter to Wattpad. And I remember, it's November, my birthday is November 25th. On the 25th, I did not upload, even though I'd said, like, in the title, which is another tip for Wattpad, you put how often and when you upload in the title. So, like, I think I had something like updated every Friday or something. No, sorry, updated daily. So, everyone was waiting for this new chapter. It was my birthday, so I didn't write anything that day. And I got like hundreds of messages from people saying like, some people were genuinely angry with me, and I was like, wow, it was a weird reaction. So that's when I knew, I kind of had something, and by that point I had something like 100,000 reads. But I remember in the first like week or two, I was I was just writing for this one guy called like Achilles 22 from Indonesia, who was just writing a little comment every time I'd upload a chapter. He'd write a little comment saying, yeah, I really like this, in like broken English. And I was like, yeah, thank you, Achilles. I'm going to keep going. And that was all the motivation I needed to begin with. So thank you, Achilles, because without you, if I was just writing and sort of posting into the abyss, who knows what might have happened. So again, the series of events where, I could have not done this, and then I did. And yeah, so anyway, long story short, after 4 months, I'd hit a million reads, I think. After 6 months, I'd hit 3 million. So it's sort of exponentially growing. And this journalist on NBC News had reached out to me, and he was doing an article on Wattpad, and he said, I clicked around, and yours came up, and you had your email. Your email was available online. Thank God I had my email on Wattpad. So no one would do that now, but I did. So that's why he reached out to me. And I was doing this interview down this terrible connection. I don't know if it was his or mine, but it was awful. But I managed to get my interview across. And the day after his article came out, Audible asked to purchase the audiobook rights to my book, and that's when I reached out to my boss, and I was like, listen, that thing that you said might happen? Well, it has, and now I need some advice. What do I do? He said, look, if you sell your audiobook rights separately, sometimes it can hurt your chances of a print deal. Like HarperCollins at the time, I don't know if this is true now, but at the time, I think HarperCollins was, saying, we don't mess with Audible side deals. You come to us with all the rights, and that's how we work. So, it would take HarperCollins off the table, I think was like my understanding at the time. So I was like, oh, okay, what do I do? Because, I've got this offer from Audible. What am I going to do? Like, email my old boss from Penguin and say, can I get a book deal, please? Like, that was kind of what it was. And he was like, look, here are the 6 best agents in the United Kingdom. And he said, email them. No, actually, what he did was he introduced me to an editor after all. So in the end, I did get to speak to an editor after I'd left Penguin Random House, and there wasn't a role for me. And he gave me the list of these agents, and I contacted them. All of them offered to represent me, I think within 24 hours. And then it was off to the races. I got preempted in Brazil with a 6-figure deal. I then had auctions in the UK, auctions in the United States, and now I'm in 17 languages. I'm a New York Times bestseller. I'm a Sunday Times bestseller. I've written something like 11 books now, I think. 3 different series, 2 teen, 1 adult, and the adult one is the one I'm working on now. It's called Dragon Rider, and I'll stop blathering on now. Sorry, Evan.
No, that was amazing. I mean, what a wild ride of a story. And what I love is that you kind of just like you have this mentality of going in and seeing where things will progress. You don't start with a huge master plan and you have to stick with it like step by step. And so, I think that's it's such a reality for writers too, that there is no common path to success. And so just being open to opportunity really led you down this path. I mean, like, the Wattpad thing, that was kind of like you said, it's like winning the lottery, like no one would realistically think, oh, it's going to be me, except you decided, well, why not? Let's give it a shot. Right. And I love that you approached it from a very business perspective. Like, let me figure out this platform and what works. Okay, so you've written YA, like you said, a couple of series in YA, and then also now you're working on an adult series. What was that transition like? Was there anything different that you had to learn moving from a YA audience to an adult audience?
It's a really hard question because I've always kind of written for myself. So and it was my publishers who determined what my books would be like. But over time, I've learned what teen fiction publishers like, what they don't like, what you can, how how far you can push the envelope in teen versus adult in various spheres, all sorts of different spheres. And I've always, frankly, I felt quite constrained, in that space. And have had serious rounds of edits where it's been for that reason that I've had to make substantial changes. So I found it very freeing to write adults, and I almost felt like it's sort of what I started out writing. It's just my first book was so teen, that it had to be teen. But I don't necessarily think my writing style is very teen. I think it's just easy reading, and the response to Dragon Rider has been, really a real relief to me because it is always like it's hard to self-assess. I don't think my writing is, you know, like a teen, like typical of teen or stereotypical of teen necessarily. It's not what I read for fun, really. At least not for the last sort of decade. I'm mostly reading historical fiction, adult fantasy fiction, adult sci-fi. That's sort of my bag. So it feels like I take more inspiration from adults than other teen fiction. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't say I changed a huge amount. I just sort of had to sort of remove all these sort of railings that I'd put up for myself when I was writing teen fiction, and it was hard, getting swearing back in, sex scenes, that sort of stuff. It's difficult to, after 10 years of really censoring yourself, to actually be like, oh yeah, I can do that risque thing. I can have a morally gray character who actually does hold some quite unpleasant views. That's the sort of thing that I really appreciated about writing adult.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, I've kind of experienced a similar transition moving from YA. We both started in YA. I think that you were published maybe like, I'd say half a generation, quote unquote, generation ahead of me, even though you're much younger than I am. So it's like I was aware of you as an author before because as someone who's also business minded, I always studied the authors that came before, who was successful, what were they doing? And now this is why I'm doing this podcast because it's just really great, I think, to share what we've learned, right, during our journeys with everyone
Yeah.
else. So I want to talk about your publishing house, but one more question, since we're kind of like getting started with NaNoWriMo or novel writing challenges this month. There are a lot of writers who are doing that. Do you have any advice now, since that's how you kind of got your start, for anyone who wants to begin a novel or is working on something new?
Gosh, well, setting a daily target is super helpful, I think, because it really shows in your face how far behind you're falling. So that can be a useful skill. I'd also say, you're supposed to be writing every day or every Friday, whatever your system is. On the days that you really don't feel like writing, you're tired, you've had a hard day, maybe some bad things happen that day. I genuinely think that this is the best, technique I've ever had, which is to just always force yourself to write a little bit. You'd be so surprised how often just starting something off, you're like, okay, I'm finishing off, and that's why I always recommend people finish their writing session midway through a sentence, midway through a paragraph, midway through a scene. Because basically you sit down, you're not just staring at a blank page, and you've got to get the writing juices flowing. So anyway, so you finish that sentence, you finish that paragraph, you start getting pulled back into the story. You'd be surprised. Some of the days where I've been absolutely exhausted and annoyed and not wanting to do any work are some of my most productive days because I forced myself to just write a little, and then I was like, well, I'm actually quite enjoying writing this scene. Let me just finish off this little bit. And suddenly it's an hour later and you've pumped out 1,000 words and like, oh, that was pretty good. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. And also, there's so much work that happens later in revision, right? So, in some ways, it's just like, just get some words out. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
perfect right now.
absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about your publishing house. So, Portal Books is your brainchild. How did you how did you even decide, what, this is what I want to do? I'm already a successful author, but now I want to branch out and do something else that is kind of adjacent, but it takes your industry knowledge, but in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The publishing, I really, Portal Books and my writing, my traditional publishing sort of side, they really don't intersect that much at all. I found, I operate in this sort of weird niche. Well, I wouldn't even call it weird. I would just say little known niche that does not intersect with traditional publishing much in any way until very recently. But yeah, okay, let me give you a bit of a background. So first of all, I I'm not the only brainchild for Portal Books, although it may have been my original idea. But it was founded by myself and a very successful self-published author who also writes cultivation-inspired Dragon Rider books, called Michael Miller. And also a very close friend of mine, just like Michael is. He got married and I went to his wedding this year. Michael's now left the business to pursue writing more completely. In fact, he's found that he enjoys it more. So it's just me and my very close friend Brooke, who he used to work at Kraft Heinz in marketing, slightly soul destroying, I think, job for him, and he really loved books and writing, and so we all just got together, and I met him at a writing group, Brooke, and Michael I met at like again, like if I hadn't met Michael, Portal Books would not be where it is today. Michael really helped us set it up a huge amount. We'd be nowhere without him. But Michael, I kind of really met him. I'd met him before, but I kind of really got to know him at this like how to write fantasy events at Bloomsbury. Which me being already a published author, I didn't really need to go, but Brooke wanted to go, and I was like, I'll keep you company. I'll go along. Maybe I'll learn something. There's always something to learn. But I could have not gone to that, and I could have not met Michael, and then we could have not invited him to come for ramen afterwards, where I just told it. I told me and Brooke had already been talking about it, and we are just like, look, there is this genre that is selling like crazy on Amazon, and traditional publishing does not care about it at all. They just don't. They haven't cared about it for a decade. I spent so long trying to evangelize this genre, because teenage boys aren't reading. They're not getting many books published for them, and publishers point to poor sales as the reasoning for this, which I don't think would wash with any other demographic, but that's my opinion. They so this genre, it's mostly adult men reading it, but it could be popular among teenage boys if because they don't tend to read in ebook form, and these books are pretty much all ebook because there's no traditional publishers working on it. um and we saw this genre, and okay, so lit RPG is this genre where if you've the closest approximation I could find in traditional publishing is Ready Player One. So if you're not familiar with Ready Player One, it's like where as a main character, he puts on like a VR headset and he's transported to a video game world with video game rules. And he's got a quest in that game and he needs to beat it. And he's chased around the real world while he's trying to beat the game in the video game world. And lit RPG isn't always that. Sometimes it's like I've died and I've reincarnated in a video game and it's never explained, but you just accept it and now that's it. Or I've been sucked into a portal and now I'm in a video game. Or sometimes, and this is actually probably the most popular genre of lit RPG right now, aliens have taken over the world and made everything video game rules just for fun.
It's so interesting. It's so specific. And what I find fascinating is that, so like you said, your writing career is completely separate. So you didn't create this publishing house to publish your own work. Like your
No,
writing continues to be published by traditional houses, but yet one of
yes.
the original business partners was someone with self-publishing experience. So can you explain to like an uninformed audience member like myself, there's traditional publishing, there's self-publishing, which is sometimes called indie publishing, and then there's like small presses, which is like what Portal Books is, and where do you sit and how do you function like business wise in relation to those others?
So I would consider us to provide pretty much all the services of a traditional publisher, but with one sort of major difference. which is basically because of the sort of oligopoly that exists in the West around traditional publishing, traditional printing, and traditional retailers. It's very, very difficult to sort of break into this world, and specifically around getting books physically onto shelves in bookstores. So, although we are not purely digital, we produce audiobooks for the vast majority of our books. In fact, a lot, I would say probably the greatest proportion of our income actually comes from audiobooks because the genre is insanely popular in the audio space. Um, but yeah, what else would I say? Yeah, and we do produce paperbacks and often hardbacks, but they are print on demand on Amazon. So you can still order one, but it's going to be slightly more expensive than the mass printed, heavily discounted. So for example, there's a printer called Clays that produces most of the books in the United Kingdom. It prints a huge amount of them, something like 30 million copies. Um, and we asked them to print a paperback in the cheapest format they have, and it was going to cost us £3 per book to print it. Now, most retailers they take the book at half price. So let's say it's £8.99. They're basically paying £5 for it. So we've got a £2 profit margin, and then you've got to pay for shipping, and then they will return it. Now, what do Clays charge a big publisher like Hachette, who have negotiated with them, say we guarantee you 10 million prints at the minimum each year? They get something like 11 pence. So for us to compete with Hachette, we're paying something like 30 times. I'm not sure if the numbers are exactly right, but it's something like that extreme. It's very, very difficult to make a profit as a small publisher getting books onto shelves. And then the other issue is when you do, so we did try a few times to get our books on bookshelves in the United Kingdom, and we went with a few small retailers. And I traveled around the country on my own dime on the train to see if they were stocking our books on the shelves, and they did not for the vast majority of them. And then they sent them back to us at our cost. So it's like you're printing these books. You have no other way of selling them if they don't sell through that retailer, because we don't have the warehousing capacity to then just stick them on Amazon and ship them like another publisher would. So yeah. So all of that is to say, we are digitally led in audio and ebook. We're also on Kindle Unlimited because the genre of lit RPG is Kindle Unlimited. It's because there's no traditional publishers really in the space. Everyone's on Amazon because that's where all the self-published authors go because of the Kindle Unlimited program. So it's that program where you pay a certain amount a month, you can read as much as you like for the books that are in that program, and then the people who wrote those books or the publishers, they get like a paid per page read basically. And it's like this big pot that gets divided between people like our average price per page read. It's all sort of calculated at the end.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So how do you work if you're allowed to share like with your authors? Like, are your book deals structured in the same way that a traditional deal would be? Or is there like a profit sharing thing, kind of like how the new authors equity publishing house is set up?
So, believe it or not, we originally used my sort of contracts for my company as a sort of boilerplate. We made changes, etc. But we kind of used it as a boilerplate. And frankly, the contracts evolved a lot more since then. And not in terms of the percentages, but just in terms of like the way it was structured, the clauses, things like that. We've made it a lot more lenient, is all I'll say. We just made it. Michael's self-published author didn't at the time have a very high opinion of traditional publishing contracts. And so he went for it and he was like, no, we are treating our authors like I would want to be treated if a traditional publisher came to me. So he was like, no, getting rid of that. He ripped it to shreds, and then that's how we went with. And every year actually we make it even more lenient because there's just no need for a lot
Right.
of it. And that's not. I think publishers they just want to cover themselves completely because they publish so many books. But for us, it's just sometimes it can be a bit draconian. And yeah, we've and it's not to say my original one was particularly draconian. We also took parts from other contracts that we found online because we wanted to be comprehensive. But yeah, boilerplate traditional publishing contracts are not what we use. We
I
we
mean,
we
I
want to be
used to be
better.
a lawyer at one of the big international firms. Our clients were like the huge companies, not publishing houses, but I get it
Hmm.
because publishing houses, like those other big corporations, they hire lawyers who we write very long contracts. I mean, my traditional
Yeah.
publishing contracts, they're all, 25 pages. I think recently I got one, it was short and it was only 20 pages, and I was shocked because I have other ones that run so much longer. I'm kind of curious now that you have been published yourself in traditional publishing and you run a small press. What is your recommendation for writers in terms of like where they should seek to be published for their work?
I mean, look, I've had a very I wouldn't leave traditional publishing for love nor money. I don't have the because I've got a team supporting me at Portal, and I've since more recently I've taken more of a back seat. I still work at Portal, I still contribute, I still have a role there, but it's really Brooke who's sort of the managing director now, basically. I'm also a director with him, but in terms of like day to day, sometimes he's taking a bit more of a role there. So, but all of that is to say, I don't think there's a right way. I can't recommend a right way. I'm having a great time with traditional publishing. Hopper, Voyager in particular, my publisher that I'm with now, my experience with them has been absolutely wonderful. Really, really good publisher, very treat me very well, and have been just a joy to work with. Frankly, I've enjoyed my move from teen to adult for sure, in that sense. Um, but yeah, self-publishing's worked very well for Michael. He's so successful now. And then obviously some of the authors that work for Portal that have written books for Portal are full-time authors now. And they weren't before. Some of them were literally people that I sort of knew through Twitter, messaged them saying, hey, I know you write, like you like to write for fun, because I've met them at like signings or whatever. Just they'd just be a fan of mine, quite honestly. And I'd say, look, we're looking for writers. Can you send me a sample? I'd be like, wow, this guy could write. And then suddenly they're now a full-time author with us. I think several of our authors are now full-time, having never written anything or only dabbled or never finished anything before they started working with us. So again, I think they would say that small presses works for them. So, and frankly, I think traditional press, because there isn't I don't know how traditional publishing would work for lit RPG, to be honest. I don't
Mm-hmm.
because we've only seen Dungeon Crawler Carl, which is finally being picked up 10 years after I banged on every publisher's door I could, saying there is a genre here. Teenage boys will read it, adult men will read it. It's completely untapped. No, it's just the Wild West. There's no opportunities for editing, no opportunities for a traditional publishing contract, no opportunities for good covers, good copy editing, just the Wild West. Why don't you try one? Why don't you try one? No, no, not for me. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't play video games. Video games aren't my thing. There'll be an editor who's into video games. I haven't met one. I haven't met one who understands it or wants to. It's pretty rare. I spent to be honest, before Portal launched, I spent a good while trying to, and to be fair, I wasn't the teen space, so it's mostly teen publishers, and this is an adult genre, really. We haven't tried it in teen yet. We don't know how it will go with teen. Ready Player One did pretty well, is all I'd say there. Even though it's not quite lit RPG, the rules aren't, he didn't advance in levels in quite the way people would expect in a lit RPG, but it's pretty close. So, even Ready Player One was originally an adult novel that they tried in teen and found it took off. So
Oh,
all of that
interesting.
is, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was an adult novel. And then they, sort of strayed into the teen section, did well there, and they're like, oh, well, it does work, does work. Or maybe it was one of those joint, but I do know that it was originally like this is an adult book for adults. Anyway, look, what can I say? I'm very glad to see traditional publishing. Frankly, I was kind of happy with the status quo because we had no traditional publishing competitions, just other small presses doing great work as well. But I would love to see lit RPG on bookshelves in America, and there is no way for us to do that really. There's just too many barriers in the way. Even in the United Kingdom, small presses, some of them have had to like go basically to get your book on a shelf. You have to go through a big publisher, so you have to do a
Mm-hmm.
deal with them to arrange the publishing, printing, warehousing, stocking, and delivery and pulping if it doesn't sell of your book, and they take a nice hefty chunk. So
Oh, you mean so
suddenly
you as a small press would have to do a deal with a big publisher just to get that distribution?
some small presses do in the UK, but those are the ones
Interesting.
that are like with children's books. There's no ebook market for picture books really. It's pretty difficult from what I hear, and like even middle chapter books and kind of middle grade. can be a little difficult to succeed in ebook on there because kids don't really read that much in ebook. Parents aren't, maybe for vacation or whatever, but it's the experience of going to a bookstore, buying a colorful book. Here it is, kiddo. No, I feel like ebook doesn't do so well for middle grade, and teen is sort of where it starts to be read. And frankly, there's a lot of adults reading teen in the ebook space. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm hopeful that it will do well. I really am.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I mean, I'm just so excited for you and you're so innovative. So, I mean, that's fantastic. And I think maybe trying to wrap it up in terms of the where people should go to get published, it's specific to your manuscript, right, to what you're writing. And some books will be better at a traditional publisher, some books will be better at a small press that can maybe handle the niche and give it more attention like you guys do at Portal. And then some people, like, they're built for self-publishing if you're willing to do that hustle and you like having the control of every aspect, which I know I'm too lazy to do, but we've both have had friends with great successes. Okay, I have one last question for you, and this is from one of our community members, Joseph R.
Oh.
And he wants to know, how do you balance your career as a writer and then also running a publishing house? And I know you've taken a step back a little bit from Portal, but I think that's still really interesting because a lot of writers, they have day jobs, they have other ways that their time has to be spent.
Yeah, I mean, look, I found it extremely difficult, to be honest, having three different jobs that pull you in different directions. And, mentally, Portal and my writing are completely separate. So, I do feel like I'm pulled in three different directions sometimes, and the fact my family business is very important to me as well. It's at a sort of very crucial juncture at the moment, with my family business as well, not to go into too much detail. But, so it is hard, and I wouldn't necessarily advise anyone to overwork themselves like I am right now. But it's hard, it's hard when you're successful. I guess, Portal, I have to say it is a successful business. It's growing. Some of our authors are, extremely successful authors now. I mean, really household names, just, even outside of the lit RPG space now. So Portal's going great. My books are still doing great. I think, in the adult space, the Dragon Rider book seems to have sold pretty well, and I could keep writing if I wanted to. It hasn't been a disaster or anything like that. So I'm pulled in these, I'm just pulled in all these different directions. Like, what do you drop when everything's going great, but you have to work hard? So it is difficult for me, and I will have to look a little bit at, what else can I do to free up some more time for myself. So yeah, I can't, maybe that's a sad note to end it on, but I do plan on continuing to try and write, so I don't think I'm ever going to give up writing completely or anything like that. But I do wonder whether I should be moving more towards single novels on their own rather than trilogies with deadlines. So, you write the book, you send in the book, all you've got is a copy edit. There's no deadline hanging over you because, it's your own time. And next time you want to write a book, you write another book and then off it goes. Because I think for me, living under deadline for the last 11 years has probably been the hardest thing for me. Just, I feel like I've been constantly at university with some sort of like major dissertation due every year. And I think, it's hard. It's hard. I tell you, it is hard.
No, I think that though this is actually kind of a hopeful ending because there's just still so much opportunity, right? And so it's all
Hmm.
good things that are happening, and
Yeah.
you just got to find a little balance. How do I have so many good
Hmm.
things? But it also kind of it's a good example of the ebb and flow, I think, of a creative career. And sometimes you have more time for one part of it, and sometimes that gets set into the background for a little bit, but you can always come back to it. And so
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled for all your success and for like all of your bravery into diving into these different kinds of opportunities. If people want to find you online, where is the best place? And then if people are interested in maybe submitting to Portal, then let us know as well where they could do that.
Sure. So if you're familiar with the lit RPG genre, and I do recommend that you make yourself thoroughly well read, because believe it or not, uh, for a while it was considered the lit RPG gold rush, and many right to market authors went in without really understanding lit RPG and very quickly pumped out a book, and they didn't find success because you really do need to understand the genre and its tropes. So I'm not saying anyone out there who's a writer, write a lit RPG and send it in. I really do recommend that you give the genre a thorough read and see what you like and see what you don't, and then write. But yeah, we have a submission process. It's all laid out on our website, www.portal-books.com. And you can find me at Taran Matharu 1, I think it is, on Twitter, Taran Matharu author. on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook just under my name. Um, and yeah, I'm not a huge social media user in terms of like posting about myself, but I am relatively responsive in terms of people just DMing me or tweeting at me. But yeah, you can follow along with my journey there. I am trying to put myself a bit more out there in terms of sharing what my life is like. I don't know, I've become kind of shy and since COVID about like posting stuff about myself. I don't know why that is. Did you ever have that, or did people post more? I don't know. For me, it was like, oh, I don't want to.
I think it
Yeah.
goes both ways. I mean, there's
Mm,
kind of nothing going on sometimes, so there's nothing to post. But yeah, there's
yeah.
definitely some getting used to again how to interact with actual people after COVID. But you
Yeah.
know,
Believe
all
me,
right.
believe it or not, I worked all the way through COVID. I was renovating a castle for most of COVID, so
Oh my goodness.
I never worked harder in my life than during COVID, believe it or not. So I remember it quite differently to everyone else, unfortunately.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story that we'll have to have you tell sometime. Thank you so much for being on the show, Taran. This was so much fun, and I learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.